Yeah. Firstly, thanks for asking me to, to chat with you guys. Yeah, it's a different world we're in at the moment. That's for sure. I seem to be doing this now, you know, probably two, three times a day, and I actually believe that we won't be getting on planes and traveling around too much in the future. But yeah, 30 minutes. So let's get in. My name is Andy Watts. I'm the head of whiskey for Distell, and I've been with the company now just over 35 years. Managed the distillery at Wellington for 25 of those before taking up this new position in 2016. I think, I don't know the education level of people on whiskey, so we're going to keep it really simple. But I think the question which, needs answering is actually what is whiskey? And whiskey is a totally natural product. It's water, it's grains, and it's yeast. There is no addition of sugars allowed. There is no flavorings allowed in whiskey either. And there are three types of whiskey basically: malt whiskey, which is made from malted barley, distilled in copper pot stills. And then you have grain whiskey, which is generally made from maize or wheat. In South Africa, we use yellow maize, and that's distilled in a column still. And then you get blended whiskey, which is a combination of the malt and the grain whiskies. Um, Everybody talks about malt whiskey. Everybody knows the iconic brands, Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, the brands from the island of Islay, like Lagavulin, Lafroig, and those are the malt whiskies which everybody talks about, and it's the romance of the industry. You go to Scotland, you will visit a malt distillery. There are about 128 at the moment which are operational there. Here in South Africa, we just have the one, the James Sedgwick Distillery, which is the only commercial distillery. And by commercial, I mean our products are available in all towns, bottle stores throughout the country after lockdown. And, there are a few craft distillers here, but we are the only ones who produce on a commercial basis. So back to the malt whiskey, it's the romance, everybody talks about it. In Scotland, there are only 5 grain distilleries, but yet they pump out a lot of alcohol. So they're very industrial looking sites. It's not the romance, but the grains are necessary. They're very necessary because they produce a lighter spirit, which you then will blend with the complex, flavorful malt whiskies to produce blended whiskey, which is around about 90% of the whiskey which is consumed. So although everybody talks about malt whiskey, um, it is only about 10% of the total market of product which is consumed. Lots of people ask me, what's my favorite whiskey? Um, I do have some favorites, but I think I always like to say that I don't believe that there is only one whiskey which suits every occasion. I think if you're only drinking one whiskey, then you are doing yourself a disservice. If taken responsibly, the whiskey journey can last you a lifetime. I always use the analogy of a rainbow. Just when you think you're getting to the end of that rainbow and you can see that pot of gold, it just moves on. And that's the same with whiskey. Just when you think you've found that beautiful whiskey, you will then find another whiskey and you will start that journey again in a different direction. What you've eaten, what you're going to eat, the time of the day, the people you're with, all that can affect, just like wines, how you experience a particular whiskey. There are more and more at the moment occasions where people are starting to pair whiskies with food. And that is something which we've done quite successfully with our South African range of whiskies, because we try to cover all the bases in the flavor spectrums with our various brands, and partnered with some incredible chefs. And I mean, the Distell Hotel Challenge is the same. There is a challenge to create some dishes with certain wines, certain whiskies, brandies, etc. So that's becoming more and more popular, and something which is quite a lot of fun, because I'm not such a good chef or a cook, but I do enjoy giving my whiskies to the experts and seeing what they come up with, and very rarely do they disappoint. I think, to maybe look about, how has whiskey, has it changed over the years? Um, it has always remained with that simple recipe of water, grains, and yeast. And once you've distilled the spirit, it has to actually mature for a minimum of 3 years in oak casks before you can actually call it whiskey. So what happened in the older days was that there would probably one type of cask, what we call an American oak barrel, ex the bourbon industry, um, and that barrel would then have been used for the maturation of whiskey for a minimum of a 3 year period. What has happened over the last 20 to 30 years is that a lot of the distillers have started to experiment with different types of cask. So instead of just primarily being the American oak barrel, they've looked at various European oaks, sherry finishes, wine finishes. All of that allows a little bit of the influence of those products to come into the whiskey. So although you are not allowed to add flavorings or sugars, by using specific casks which have previously been used for other products, you can, and the skill here is for that previous product obviously not to overtake the whiskey, but to try and get that combination of, how much in that particular type of cask to extract the amount of flavor you require without going over the top. So that's become quite a bit of let's say, a trend over the last 20 years or so, which allows certain different types of whiskey, flavors of whiskey to come. Because apart from the water, grains, and yeast, the barley which you use, you can either have that peated or unpeated. By peated barley, we mean that is the whiskies which have the large amount of smoky flavors which come through with them, like your Islay malted whiskies. And what that means is all the barley, when it comes off the fields, is goes through a malting process where the barley is germinated. Germination is stopped by adding heat, and in the old days, it just used to be from peat fires. And peat is just decomposed vegetation over millions of years, um, which is found in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And if it's dug out and dried, it actually gives a very powerful calorific value in terms of heat. And it was used in the houses for fuel in the place of coal, which wasn't available on the islands. And that imparts this smoky flavor during the drying process into the barley. So if you like the smoky whiskies, that's where the smoke comes from to get into the whiskey. If you don't like the smoky whiskies, then nowadays we will dry the barley with big hair dryers so that you do not get that smokiness imparted into them. Lots of people ask as well, about the color of whiskey. Um, the only addition which you're allowed to make to whiskey is a caramel addition for consistency of color. A lot of whiskies do not use coloring; it's natural color, especially when it comes to single malts and let's say the limited volume products. They go more natural color for the simple reason they're generally one-offs. If you have got a commercial brand which is large volume on the shelf, then you will probably find that that particular brand, does have a certain amount of color in there just to give consistency. Um, somebody who's drinking a certain whiskey or going into different bars, he doesn't want to see the same whiskey with different colors behind. So that is allowed. The standardization of color if you want, because I mentioned a lot of people don't choose that. Lots of people also ask about the spelling of whiskey. Whiskey with a KY or whiskey with an EY. Uh, this is one of my kind of pet hates when people send me letters asking for, sponsorships or will we get involved in this, and then, because they love my whiskey, KEY. The EY is generally reserved for the USA and Ireland, and the rest of the world uses the KY. So, if you want to end up in my bin very quickly, then just use the EY spelling when you send something to me, and then I kind of know that you don't know too much about whiskey or you're not really interested in finding out about it. So that's just something to bear in mind. If there is no difference, you know, the EY or the KY, it's just a spelling. But the Irish and the Americans generally use the EY, and the rest of the world KY. Certain parts of the whiskey, like wines, are geographically protected. For example, Scotch whiskey. You may not make Scotch whiskey anywhere other than in Scotland. The same with Champagne and the Champagne region of France. And that's also, some people say, you know, what is bourbon? Where does bourbon come from? That again is a geographical indicator. It does come from the United States. It must come from the United States. And there are also other certain rules and regulations for bourbon which make it different from, let's say, the whiskies as we know them from Scotland, Ireland, or the rest of the world. And the big one is that they must use a brand new charred cask for the maturation of their product. And they can only use that cask once, which is quite interesting, because if you look at one of the bigger ones of the American bourbon industry, you know, you're using probably close to 1 million casks a year just for the maturation of that product. So you kind of think, well, where do they get all this wood? I was in the States and I visited that particular cooperage, which is responsible for the production of those casks. And I asked that question, and they said in America there are now more trees there than they were when Columbus arrived. So they have a very strict replacement. They chop one, they replace with 5. So it sustains the the wood supply. Why do they have to use a brand new cask? It was a very interesting reason, and that was to secure the jobs of the coopers, people who make the casks. So by ensuring that it must be a new cask, there's always going to be work for those people. What happens to that cask after it's been used for bourbon? Generally goes into the American whiskey industry or the Canadian industry, and then eventually finds its way to Scotland or wherever. Not many people look for the cask directly after it's been used for bourbon because of those vanilla sweet flavors which come through. For BAIN'S in particular, that is what we are looking for. So we go to the States each year and we source our casks to bring back for the maturation of BAIN'S. And we don't use one set of those casks, we use 2, which is also quite unique in the industry. We mature for the first 3 years in one set of first fill ex-bourbon, and then we will take the whiskey out of those casks after 3 years, get a second set of the first fill ex-bourbon, put the whiskey back in there for a further 2 years. And the simple reason is that a lot of the extraction in the maturation process takes place in those first couple of years. If you put it into wood in the first year, you get a lot of extraction. After year 1, slightly less. Year 2, slightly less. Year 3. And after year 3, originally when I started with bourbon, I was expecting this eureka product, this amazing product which I would have. And I liked it, but it wasn't quite there. And to have left it in that same cask for 4 and 5 years, I was not going to get more extraction. So we took the really unusual step of buying that second set. So going 1, 2, 3, another set, 1, 2. And what that did then was that gave us twice the opportunity to extract those beautiful, soft, vanilla, fruity toffee flavors, which we have prominent in BAIN'S. The other thing about casks is the country which you're actually maturing them in. The colder climate countries like Scotland, Ireland are probably losing between 1.5% to 2% per year to the angels. That's known as the angel share, that loss of liquid which evaporates, alcohol which evaporates during the aging process. Here in South Africa, we're losing between 4.5% and 5% per year because we're a warmer climate. You go to places like Taiwan, where Kavalan comes from, and those people are losing close to 12 to 15% per year, just due to the climate. So that is something which you've got to look at carefully, because of that higher evaporation loss. It just means that the interaction between the wood, the atmosphere, and the spirit is happening quicker. So you've always got to be looking at that whiskey whilst it's maturing, to try and make sure that it doesn't go over the top too quickly. So we will look probably every, after the first 3 years, because it must be in for 3 years, but if it's destined to go for older products, then we will initially start looking every 6 months. And then after that, maybe every 3 months. And then when we're getting closer to the age we're looking for, probably on a monthly basis, just to make sure everything is on track. So it's not as easy as what it is in Scotland, and easy that in inverted commas, where because of the colder climate, you can really forget about it for the first 10 years, knowing that everything is happening so much slower in that climate. When it comes to the temperature of whiskey, when we serve it, we tend to find that room temperature is the best. If you put lots of people, lots of bartenders, the first thing they will do is they'll put ice in the glass, and then they'll look to put the whiskey in. Ice tends to pull in the flavor, so we don't use ice at all in any tastings. If you go to Scotland, you will never see ice. The Scots do not drink ice in their whiskey for that simple reason: it pulls in the flavor. So we would normally suggest just a dash of maybe slightly chilled water, and the water helps then the flavors come out of the glass towards the nose, where you can experience the whiskey a little better. But yeah, it is the way we taste. But when it comes to drinking whiskey, there is really no right or wrong way. So if somebody comes in and they do want ice in their whiskey, great. If somebody comes in and they want to mix their whiskey with an appetizer or a Coke, that's also okay. It's probably not the way the traditionalists would see it, but I think our industry has moved way beyond the traditional way of consuming a product. And I think if you told the modern day consumer how to consume, you would probably lose half of your market anyway. So, it really is about, as long as it's consumed responsibly, then there is no right or wrong way. What else can we tell you a little bit? Any questions while I'm thinking?
I got a question.
Questions at all? Yes, Grape.
Basically, I want to ask now, I know pairing food with whiskey now is something not really new, but something new to a lot of people. But if someone does ask you to pair it with food, what would you say is the best type of food to pair a whiskey with?
Sure. Well, firstly, it depends what the whiskey is. So let's use BAIN'S as an example.
Yeah.
BAIN'S being a sweet, spicy, lighter style of whiskey, and I would look probably more towards seafoody, maybe a kind of a Cajun calamari or a chicken dish, possibly a light bobotie, something like that. If you're having it with, dessert, something, probably a nice vanilla ice cream. Maybe put the BAIN'S into a freezer beforehand. It's not going to freeze. It will change the viscosity a little bit, and maybe just a dash then of BAIN'S on top of the ice cream when it's served. I think, if you're looking at smoky, peaty whiskies like your Islay whiskies, the Lafroigs, the Bowmores, the Lagavulins, then you're looking at more your heavier red meat, deeper dishes, stews. I don't like to say cold weather foods, because I love a steak any time of the year, any time of the day. But you tend to find that those do go better with that. So the lighter style whiskies, more seafood, a little bit of spice, chicken dishes, and then your heavier whiskies, more complex whiskies, go towards your meats and your stews and your slightly deeper dishes.
And sorry, just one, based on that what you said now, when you say a heavier whiskey, would that be more like a malt whiskey or like a blended whiskey?
Well, I mean, the whole idea of blends is to actually kind of soften down the complexity of the malt.
Okay.
So yes, I would be more saying to malt whiskies. Blended whiskies, they really are the drinking whiskies of the industry. It's what keeps the wheels turning. So I don't think you would use those probably in food taste.
Okay, great. Let's have Sinead up there from the Balalaika Marriott in Joburg. Have you got a question for Andy?
Yeah, I do have a few questions. I just want to find out, first of all, when things go wrong during maturation, for example, if your cask is not doing what you are predicting it to do, how do you handle that, or how do you backtrack on those kind of situations and go forward from those?
Yeah, not everything I try finishes up in a bottle. Not everything works. Innovation is it's one of the most exciting parts of my work, but it is actually, some you hit, some you miss. Fortunately, we hit more than what we miss. But if we do have something which doesn't particularly work, then we sit with some brands which are literally millions of liters per year. And it's very easy to work away those, let's say, missed trials, missed innovation into your larger commercial blends. Because a couple of thousand liters and a couple of million liters, it's very easy to slowly work it away. So nothing goes to waste, but not everything we try finishes in the bottle.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Andy.
That's a good question there. Keegan, Terry from Belmont Nelson.
Yes, so my question is going about how would you go about pairing local South African whiskey, specifically BAIN'S and Three Ships, with Cuban cigars, like your Monte Cristos, Romeo and Juliet's, Cohibas?
Yeah, it's something I've never smoked in my life, not even a beautiful cigar with a nice malt whiskey. So you're probably asking the wrong guy there. But yes, I mean, it's incredibly popular amongst both male and female consumers to enjoy a cigar with a good malt whiskey. I'm actually one of those people. One of the strange things or interesting things about me is that I could spend the whole day in a tobacconist. I really could. I love the smells. I can involve myself in the smells, and exactly the same with coffee. I've never drank a cup of coffee in my life where I could spend the whole day in a coffee shop just experiencing the aromas. I love the smell. I've never learned to appreciate either smoking or drinking of coffee. So I'm sorry, I can't give you expert advice on that one, but I'm sure, it's like most things. I think it's, whiskey is very subjective. It is really about what do you enjoy, not what somebody next to you says they must enjoy. And I think that's important because whiskey can create great debate, but always remember there's never a right or a wrong answer. It's an opinion. So I'm sure the same applies with cigars. You play around until you find that combination which you think works well. Obviously, something like a Three Ships 10-year-old single malt is going to pair differently to what a BAIN'S would, just because of the spectrum or the wide difference between the two products.
Very nice. Good question again. Davika is from Taj, Cape Town. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I want you to ask, does whiskey in a bottle lose its strength with age, or does it improve?
Once the whiskey is released from the wooden cask, then the aging process stops. If you have a bottle of whiskey which is correctly sealed and it's been stored in a cool, dry place, out of direct sunlight, without vast temperature changes, then that bottle can literally last a lifetime. Once opened, again, if it's stored in the correct manner, then it's not like wine. It does oxidize, but very, very, very slowly. And again, that whiskey is 10 to 15 years easily in the right condition, but I think if it takes you that long to consume the bottle, then either your bar's got a problem or you've got a problem. It doesn't stay that long with me in my house. But yeah, once it comes out of wood, the aging stops. So if you've had 10 years in wood and 10 years in bottle, it doesn't make it a 20-year-old whiskey. The aging stops after the wood, but then the whiskey doesn't change in the bottle. It will stay the same in the bottle.
Brilliant. Okay. Fantastic. And Justice is from Silinson, Elegant and Maharani in Durban.
Actually, honestly, nothing at the moment. I'll just think of something and get back to you.
Oh, okay. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Mamela, have I asked you? Not yet. He's from 12 Apostles.
Yes, I would like to ask a question.
Yes, please.
If you dash a whiskey, let's say a BAIN'S, if you dash it with a soft drink, are there possibilities if the whiskey flavor is gonna disappear?
Oh, I'm sure there is. I mean, if you look at something like, depends what soft drink, but if you look at something like Pine, then that basically takes over everything. So yeah, I mean, it's about, but again, going back to that subjectiveness, it's about what you find appeals to you. So I mean, I've seen some of the most expensive whiskies on a table with a bottle of appetizer. Probably not my choice of a mixer. But yet, if that is the way people enjoy it, you know, there is no reason why not. But yes, I think same with even spicy food with whiskey. If you go too spicy, then some whiskeys you're going to start actually defeating the object of trying to get that matched as it should be. But it's again, it's about, you know, finding that combination which works for you.
Okay, I've got Peter John as well. He's from the Suntown Square up in Johannesburg. Have you got a question, Peter?
I just need to find out, does BAIN'S have premiums as well?
Sorry, Peter?
Does BAIN'S have premium? So just one style?
In South Africa, in our retail market in South Africa, we just have the normal BAIN'S. But what I've been doing over the years, I have been innovating. Some of those innovations have been incredibly successful, but we did not have the volume to go into retail in South Africa, so we chose to go global travel retail. So we do have a 15-year-old BAIN'S at the moment in travel retail, and we also have 3 18-year BAIN'S, which are being finished in 3 different sherry casks, PX, Pedro Jimenez, Fino, and Oloroso. But those are only available in duty-free at this stage.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
Gosh, I didn't know that either. So I thought it was just one BAIN'S, and that was the winning formula. I've got a lovely retender up from Ruben's Johannesburg. Retender Maratsanga, have you got a question?
Most of my questions have been answered, but out of interest sake, I would like to ask, how's the whiskey market in South Africa in general?
That's actually a very good question because, you know, South Africa, if you think back 20 years, the spirit of South Africa was brandy. We still make the world's best brandy in South Africa. It's just that the category has, well, whiskey, to be honest, has become the, you know, the drink of the country now in terms of spirits. And that started at the end of the, you know, the late 90s, where whiskies which had stayed away from South Africa started to come back. Whiskey is an international drink. It is seen as aspirational, and more consumers started turning towards whiskey. And what's interesting about South Africa is our age population which drink whiskey. If you go to Europe, for example, it is still predominantly a male drink and a middle-aged to older male drink. Women, ladies are starting to drink whiskey, but in South Africa, I think we're at the forefront of whiskey consumers in that our main band is between the 25 to 45-year-old age group. It's across the entire demographic of our country, and it's also got around about a 70%, 30% male to female split, which is totally amazing for me because whiskey can be seen as this masculine, intimidating product, but it isn't. It is something which, if you choose the right whiskey, if you spend time looking at different whiskies, you will find something which suits your palate. And you know, it is such a product with such a wide. You walk into a bottle store, you know, you will see so many whiskies out there. How do you make a choice? And, you know, my advice to you there is, yes, you know, have that favorite, the one you enjoy, your go-to whiskey, but then spend a little bit of time trying, going to festivals and trying whiskies which you don't know or you haven't heard of or you never thought about buying a bottle. Whiskey can be quite expensive if you're going to go out there and, you know, try to buy a full bottle and you don't like it. So if you do go to shows or get the opportunity, try a full range of whiskies rather than sticking to the, you know, to the one which you do like. But yeah, South Africa's got I think we round about now probably 35 to 40 million liters of consumption in this country. Probably around 10 million liters more than brandy, which is the second highest category at the moment. And I think South Africa sits at around about number 9 in the world in terms of Scotch whiskey consumption. Okay, so you know, that's pretty high consumption if you think of the you know, the amount of Scotch which is sold worldwide.
Absolutely, absolutely brilliant. Listen, we're running out of time. We might have time for Angel from the Durban ICC. One more question from you, Angel.
Hi.
Hi.
What makes a good whiskey?
What's what?
What makes a good whiskey?
What makes a good whiskey? Again, as I mentioned, whiskey is very subjective. What makes it in terms of the technical process, there are certain things which you must adhere to. Whiskey is 5 stages of making. It's the receiving firstly of the raw material, but then it's milling, mashing, fermentation, distillation, and maturation. Those are the 5 stages. The milling and the mashing are purely financial. It's to make sure that you have the right amount of sugars available to be converted during fermentation into alcohol. And fermentation to me is where the quality starts. You cannot distill a good spirit from a bad fermentation. Once you've done that, it doesn't mean that you home and dry, because you can take an excellent fermentation. You still have to distill it correctly. And then once you've done that, you still have to choose the right wood to go with that particular spirit. So all of that helps to form the right whiskey. But in terms of what makes a great whiskey, I think emotion plays a big part. Let's take, for example, when the Springboks won the World Cup. I think you could have had the cheapest bottle of whiskey in front of you. With the amount of adrenaline flowing that day, that whiskey will probably sit in your mind as the greatest whiskey you've drank for the rest of your life. If we'd have lost that final, you could have had the most expensive bottle of whiskey in front of you. I promise it would have tasted nice. So it's about who you're with, the occasion. All of that can turn what people might think is an average whiskey into a great whiskey. Don't always think that price is a determining factor. Take that journey, as I mentioned in the beginning. Try different whiskies. You'll be surprised that you can find some excellent whiskies without having to pay a fortune for them. A lot of whiskies, remember, do not have the marketing budgets to put themselves into Tambo for a year. And therefore we rely on word of mouth. We rely on people to try those whiskies, and through that, all of that goes to, at the end of the day, creating great whiskies in the eye of the beholder, the person who's drinking it.
Fantastic. So we're going to have to stop there. But truly, Andy, well done on all your recent awards, and it just never stops. I actually sent the group your latest awards, and I think everybody's bowled over backwards. So we're so proud, and I know you're so proud. Congratulations, really, once again.
No, thank you. It's been great chatting to you. Just one last thing from my side, just to finish on. Hands up, the ones with screens in front of me who are doing their dream job. Who is living their dream? When you grow up as a child, you've always got like this, I want to be a nurse. Who is actually living their dream? Who's now where they've always wanted to be?
Okay, well, let's hear from them quickly. Let's hear Davika. Davika, you put your hand up first.
You live in your dream, Davika. Okay. No, the only reason I asked that is because I had a dream when I was growing up as a kid and it didn't work out. And I finished up creating and turning myself into somebody who makes whiskey, which has become a dream. So, I'd just like to leave you with that message that, maybe you're not doing what you wanted to do originally when you were growing up. Or for some reason you might stop the work you're doing now, which is your dream, and have to transfer to something else. It's about how you approach it, how you do it, the passion, the energy, the dedication, everything you put into it, which actually makes the job you're doing a dream. And it is true that if you're living your dream, then you don't work a day in your life.
That's so wonderful. Those are fantastic inspirational words. Thank you, Andy. Truly fantastic. Okay,
bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Thank you very much.